Today is Saturday, May 24th, 2025, and this is William Michael. I'm the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. At this point in my life, most of the development of the academy and administrative work are behind me, and also my own children are growing up, moving out, getting started in their adult lives, and I'm finally, I think, entering into a phase of my life where I can devote myself to what I hoped to be able to devote myself to when I started my work as a classicist 20, 30 years ago. And what I've always wanted to do, what I've always looked forward to doing, was to get myself into a position in life where I would be free to really dig in and teach the 7 classical liberal arts. That's the mission, after all, of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy: to research, restore, publish, and teach the classical liberal arts. Now, in modern educational circles, there's a lot said about the trivium, much of which, unfortunately, is false because of the influence of the teaching of Dorothy Sayers and what I normally refer to as the fake classical education movement, which was really started by Protestants back in the 1990s and then embraced and followed by imprudent, to say the least, Catholics, which continues today as a real distraction and an unfortunate source of confusion that's hindering the restoration of real classical Catholic education. But what I'd like to do is begin more and more as I get older to devote myself to walking through the classic sources of the 7 liberal arts and do my best to restore some of the ancient philosophical understanding that was once taken for granted among wise men, especially among saints and doctors of the church. And the only way to do that is to go through the classic texts, to actually walk through the writings of the ancient masters. And I'd like to begin that today with a study of the opening of Nicomachus's Introduction to Arithmetic. My goal in these studies is not merely to go through the books or to cover the content of these ancient sources, but to tie together these ancient teachings and the development of true philosophy and also the development of Catholic philosophy and education to restore this medieval or scholastic Catholic mind that's largely been lost in modern educational circles. So I'd like to start today with the opening, as I said, of Nicomachus's Introduction to Classical Arithmetic, the first of the 4 liberal arts that treat of mathematical studies. So, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to assume that you've already read the opening chapter of Nicomachus's Introduction to Arithmetic. If you don't have the text, you can find it on the Academy website. Ideally, you can enroll in the Academy. You can do so for free as an extern student and at least have access to the text. You won't have access to assessments or some of the other resources, but you can access the text of the ancient studies through an extern account, which is free. Just go to classicalliberarts.com and enroll in the extern program. But if you want other resources, assessment records, and so on, support, you should take advantage of a special offer we make for adult students where you can request a coupon from the Academy office to subscribe to a full enrollment for just $10 a month. So That's what I'd recommend if you'd like to really dig in and make use of the assessments, get assignments graded, and so on. Costs just $10 a month for everything. So if you need the text, you can get it on the Academy website in the Study Center. The text is also available freely, again, on the Classical Liberal Arts Academy website. If you go to the menu on the main website, you'll see resources, and if you click on the resources link, you'll see a link to the library. And if you scroll down to the quadrivium, you can find a link to the text of Nicomachus's Introduction to Arithmetic. So I'd recommend that you stop the talk here, go read that, study that, take your time, and then come back to this talk after you've done that reading. Because I'd like to talk about the content of that opening chapter and assume that you've already had a chance to read through it, even to study it, and to become comfortable with that content. But let's discuss this opening chapter in the Introduction to Classical Arithmetic by the ancient philosopher Nicomachus. Long before the modern age tried to separate science in terms of modern science from wisdom, from ancient philosophical study, the ancient philosophers knew something that we've largely forgotten in modern society. The ancient philosophers knew that all true knowledge begins with philosophical wonder. All true knowledge begins in wonder, simply the desire to know, to understand, which we're designed to seek. And that desire for knowledge, that wonder that leads us to investigate the world, ends in worship. So there's no separation between philosophical investigation and religion. All true knowledge begins with wonder and ends in worship. Nicomachus of Gerasa was a first century philosopher and mathematician, so time of the apostles. He was a philosopher and a mathematician, which was common in the ancient world because of the influence of Pythagoras. And as we go through the arts of the quadrivium, we'll really understand what Pythagoras was thinking about and trying to explain in the ancient world, which was taken up by Plato and then corrected and modified by Aristotle. But Nicomachus was a follower of Pythagoras. He was a philosopher and a mathematician. And remember, we're talking ancient mathematicians, so don't get that confused with modern school mathematics. He opens up this book, this Introduction to Arithmetic, not with talk about numbers, not with a table of numbers or any sort of interest in calculations or counting or anything like that. None of the practical, utilitarian teaching we find in modern math books. But he opens his arithmetic with a lesson on philosophy itself. So the opening lesson in Nicomachus's Introduction to Arithmetic is a lesson on philosophy. In doing so, he grounds ancient mathematics. He grounds mathematics in the search for what is eternal. He grounds the art of mathematics in this human pursuit for the divine, what is eternal, true, and divine. And again, this goes back to what I said, that all true knowledge begins with wonder and ends in worship. And when those things are separated, it's usually because we don't have a sincere interest in wisdom, because true knowledge begins with wonder and ends in worship. Nicomachus, opening his Arithmetic, grounds mathematics in the search for what is eternal, true, and divine. For Nicomachus, there's no distinction between philosophy, mathematics, and religion or theology. All are parts of the same pursuit. Now, for Catholic students, for Catholic readers of Nicomachus, this opening is not merely an intellectual history, which is what we normally find in university philosophy courses. We have these surveys of what philosophers said, really just trivia, encyclopedic learning about the characters in the history of philosophy, or the different ideas that have been proposed in the history of philosophy. This opening to Nicomachus's Arithmetic is not merely intellectual history. It's a return for us, a return to a world where faith and reason harmonize. It's returning to a world where wise men lived, where there was no separation between faith and reason, between religion and philosophy, between study and worship. And so we should find, as Catholics, we should find great comfort in this approach to the study of mathematics because it's consistent with Catholic teaching. There's no separation of faith and reason. So let's reflect on Nicomachus's first chapter, and as we go through it, we'll think about our readings in sacred scripture, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, in the writings of the Church's greatest doctors and saints, and we'll try to uncover the meaning and the value of this ancient view of mathematics and philosophy. And I think as we go, you're going to be surprised when you think about different passages of sacred scripture and different passages of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, or the writings of St. Thomas and other of the doctors of the Church. I think that when we set them back in the context of ancient philosophy, of this timeless pursuit of what is eternal and true, what's divine, I think you'll be surprised to see how much more is present in the scriptures, in the teaching of the Church, in the writings of the saints than you might be aware of when you study those sources with a modern perspective, or with only a modern education. I think you'll appreciate just how profound Catholic teaching is when we bring it back into its original historical context of this true philosophical pursuit for truth. So again, Nicomachus begins this study of arithmetic with a discussion about philosophy. He seeks to answer the question, what is philosophy? What is philosophy? What do the ancients, what do the wise men, not the college professors today, what did the ancients think about wisdom and philosophy? What is philosophy? Nicomachus begins with a definition of philosophy that echoes across all of the classical tradition. He says that philosophy is the love of wisdom. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. And for the Greeks, that would be obvious because it's literally what the word means. Philosophia simply means the love of wisdom. But we've got to unpack this definition a little bit because we've likely heard this before. You've likely heard this before, but it just becomes stale because we hear it, but we don't hear it in its original context, and we don't appreciate the richness of this concept of philosophy, not as a subject in a modern university or a department in a modern university, but as the love of wisdom itself, with no connection at all to any formal schooling or institution, but just the human pursuit of wisdom, the love of wisdom. Nicomachus tells us that before Pythagoras, remember Nicomachus was a follower and admirer of Pythagoras. Before Pythagoras, the word wisdom and the adjective wise were used to describe anyone who had any skill of any kind. So to be silly, we could think a juggler might be considered wise because he possessed a certain skill or ability. A carpenter would be considered wise. A skilled carpenter would be called wise. A sailor who knows how to navigate a ship on the sea would be considered a wise sailor, a wise man, a shoemaker even. Anyone who had some technical skill, some unusual skill, was called wise. But Pythagoras, being a philosopher, he had a higher idea of what wisdom was, and he wasn't pleased with the use of wisdom in this indiscriminate way to refer to any kind of skill or any kind of ability. And so Pythagoras worked to change the use of this word wisdom. He gave a new meaning to the term wisdom. He restricted the term wisdom to those who pursue knowledge of what is real and unchanging. And this is a very great development in the history of ancient philosophy. Pythagoras established this notion in Greek culture of what it means to be wise. A wise man is not a man who is concerned with practical skills or temporal affairs. And one passage I recommend you take some time to look up is chapter 38, I believe it is, in the book of Sirach. I'm pretty sure it's Sirach chapter 38 in the Old Testament of the Scriptures. There's this comparison of the scribe in ancient Israel with the ordinary men of the society, the workers, the farmer, the plowman, the smith, and so on. And we see these two different vocations compared, that of the scribe who seeks the knowledge of the Most High, as Scripture will refer to God, and those men who are concerned with earthly works. That distinction between the wise man, the man who is single-heartedly devoted to the pursuit of divine knowledge, and the common man working in the world, that's a biblical distinction. But earlier than Sirach, before the time of Sirach, that distinction was made by Pythagoras. He restricted the use of the term wisdom to those men who pursue a certain kind, a certain quality of knowledge. And the language here is knowledge of what is real, knowledge of what is unchanging. Wisdom was used to describe those men who pursue that knowledge of things which are real. And by real, he meant unchanging, things that are eternal, things that always are. That content, that which is real, and we'll talk a little bit more about this idea of reality in the Pythagorean view. That which is real is that which does not change, which always is what it is. Just think about how God, in the Old Testament again, reveals himself to Moses. When Moses asks, "What is your name?" And God, in this profound, mysterious language, says to Moses, "Tell them, I am, has sent you." That is my name, God says. I am. And so we have this idea of that which is real, that which is unchanging, that which is always the same. That's, according to Pythagoras, that's real knowledge. That's what we mean by wisdom. And so philosophy is the love of that knowledge of what is real and unchanging. That's the love of wisdom. And this is no small shift. According to Nicomachus, Pythagoras refused to allow craftsmanship or practical skills to claim this title of wisdom. Instead, he reserved it for those who longed to know the truth about reality, men who separated themselves for this pursuit of wisdom. Pythagoras and his Pythagorean worldview identified only those men who long for knowledge of the truth about this idea of reality, about things that do not change. Those were the only wise men. And this is what it meant to be a philosopher or a lover or pursuer of wisdom. This desire for this knowledge, this longing for this knowledge was what was called philosophia, the love of wisdom. And it was a pursuit that a man had to separate himself from common pursuits in order to get after. And so even in the ancient world, in the time of Pythagoras, before Socrates and Plato, we have this idea of the consecrated life. We have this idea of separating oneself from ordinary worldly pursuits to devote oneself to a contemplative life. This contemplative vocation is not a Christian thing. This is a human thing. It's the pursuit of philosophy, the love of wisdom. And one of the reasons why we see vocational crises in modern society is because this whole notion of wisdom and philosophy, this whole notion of consecration to the pursuit of wisdom has been lost because of modern education and the abandonment of this Pythagorean, this ancient view of wisdom. Now, this longing, as I said, this longing for wisdom, this desire for separation or consecration, for contemplation, is not something that's foreign or not something that should be foreign to the Christian life. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I'm talking about the Catechism published in 1994, the Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that by natural reason, notice it's by natural reason, not by grace, not by the theological virtues infused into the soul, but by natural reason, men can know God with certainty on the basis of his works. That's quoted verbatim out of the Catechism. By natural reason, man can know God with certainty on the basis of his works. It's hard to read that and think about it in modern society because we all make excuses for everyone. We have all sorts of scandalous behavior and scandalous lifestyles and so on, and we say, oh, well, they don't know. No one knows. They're ignorant. They don't understand this and that. But that's not what Christianity actually teaches. Christianity teaches that by natural reason, by our humanity alone, we can know God with certainty on the basis of his works. That's straight from the Catechism. To love wisdom, therefore, if we bring these two traditions together, this tradition of the pagan, or I should say of the virtuous pagan philosophers and of Christianity, if we bring these two traditions together, we find that they overlap. And we see then that to love wisdom, which was the idea of ancient philosophy, is simply to pursue God. To love wisdom, to pursue wisdom, is to pursue God, because God is wisdom itself. And so you see how philosophy, study, human effort, and religion become really one pursuit. That's the ancient idea in true philosophy. That's the idea of true religion that was understood in ancient times, largely which has been lost because of all kinds of influences of false teaching. But to love wisdom, this philosophical spirit, is the pursuit of God. Because God, as I said, is wisdom itself. By natural reason, man can know God with certainty on the basis of his works, by the things that have been made, as St. Paul says in Romans 1. To love wisdom is to pursue God, because God is wisdom itself. And the book of wisdom in the Old Testament says, resplendent and unfading is wisdom. Notice this timelessness. Resplendent and unfading is wisdom. And she's not far off or mysterious. The book says she is readily perceived by those who love her. Resplendent and unfading is wisdom. She is readily perceived by those who love her. And again, that's from the book of Wisdom in the Old Testament. So the pursuit of wisdom, the love of wisdom, the pursuit of God himself is a natural pursuit. It's a human pursuit. It's part of who and what we are as human beings. And you can see how that idea, which was held by ancient wise men, has largely been lost among modern Christians who think that only people who are influenced by God's grace can seek God. That's more of a Calvinistic idea of total depravity, that man has been so corrupted that he's basically ruined and has no ability to do what he was created to do. That's a Calvinistic, a Protestant view of human nature or the human condition. That's not a true Catholic view of human nature. The Catholic view teaches that by natural reason, man can know God with certainty on the basis of his work. St. Paul, again, in Romans chapter 1, it's at the end of the chapter. I think it starts around verse 20 and goes to the end of the chapter. He says, what can be known about God is known by the things that he has made, so that we are without excuse. A very different message than we commonly hear in modern society, where our ignorance of these things causes us to think that they can't be known because we don't know them. And that's false. We don't know them because we don't seek them. Wisdom is readily perceived by those who love her. Wisdom is readily perceived by those who love her. But what exactly, let's move beyond this sort of introductory talk. What does this wisdom, this true wisdom, what does this wisdom actually know? What does this wisdom actually know? What is the object of true wisdom? According to Nicomachus, this wisdom is the knowledge of quote-unquote real things. Wisdom is the knowledge of real things. And here in his opening chapter, he gives a precise definition. He talks exactly about what these real things are. Wisdom is the knowledge of the truth in real things. And he explains that real things are those things which exist always the same. Real things are those that exist always the same. So anything that has any shadow of turning, as the scriptures say, anything that is changeable or that is generated or decays, that dies, that fades away, that's not a real thing in philosophy. That's not the sort of thing we seek to know as wise men, but we seek to know real things, those things that are always the same, that never depart from their essence. They never cease to be what they are. And it's just common sense. If we're investing money or seeking to buy things, we want to buy things that last. We want to invest in assets that will continue to be valuable. We don't want to purchase something or invest in something that can immediately lose its value. We hear the saying that if you buy a new car, the minute you drive it off the salesman's lot, its value immediately diminishes by some great percentage. That's not the kind of thing we want to invest in. We want to invest in that which is permanent, that which will always be valuable. So we understand that concept in finances, or at least some do. But when it comes to study and the pursuit of knowledge, the same concept applies. It doesn't make sense to seek knowledge of things that always change. It doesn't make sense to pursue things that are fleeting or transitory. St. Paul compares this to athletics. He says that the athlete goes through all of this sacrifice and training and self-discipline, all so that he can win for himself a crown of leaves in the ancient world, a crown that withers and fades away. I remember when I was a teenager playing sports, as I was moving or being moved towards my conversion, after being so wrapped up in sports throughout my childhood and through my high school years, I began to realize the vanity of athletics, because we make such a big deal of our achievements. We make such a big deal of things like, oh, we won a baseball championship and a football state championship, and we accomplished this and won the most valuable player award and this trophy and that medal and this plaque and so on. But then the next year, there's all new winners and all different champions and all different awards. And we make such a big deal of these accomplishments, and they just change year after year after year, and we don't remember who won before. We don't remember all of the award winners, all of the trophy winners. And I remember thinking about that, of how vain it was to think that my achievements in sports were some sort of big deal when the next year there would just be a new winner and a new trophy. It just became very vain. And St. Paul makes that comparison and calls us to think about what we pursue, which is eternal and unchanging, a crown that never fades. And this is what these ancient philosophers understood. They understood that there was a knowledge of things that was always changing and unreliable, really useless and fleeting. And then there was another quality of knowledge, another kind of knowledge of things that were always the same, that once that knowledge was obtained, it would be valuable forever, because those things that were known never depart from their essence. They never cease to be what they are. And so the effort required to learn them and take hold of them would never be regretted. And this is what it means, this knowledge of real things. Real things are those that exist always the same, never departing from their essence, never ceasing to be what they are. And in contrast, as I said, material things are always changing. Material things, it's important to note that we're talking about material things. Material things are always changing. They're in a state of continuous flow, constant change, forever becoming something else. Forever becoming something else. They're never the same. And so the knowledge or the possession of material things to these ancient wise men became vain and undesirable. And as they developed a taste for that which is always the same, that became the object of their love, the object of their pursuit. The knowledge of such things was the definition of philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom. What is real to the minds of the ancient philosophers is the opposite of what men consider to be real today. When we talk about angels or spirits or God, any sort of immaterial being, we see the attitude that, well, that's not real. What about real life? What about reality, real life? Knocking on what I can see. Seeing is believing. Give me something that I can get my hands on and take a look at, something real. The ancient philosophers defined reality in an opposite way. They defined what is real not as that which can be seen, which is really not true if you think about it, because it's constantly changing. That which is real is that which is eternal and unchanging. And so if you asked, well, what would the most real thing be? What would be the most realistic thing? The ancient wise men, and I'm not talking about Christians, I'm talking about ancient pagan philosophers, they would say the most real thing is God, is the great deity, whoever that might be. The divine, that is the reality, that is the knowledge, that's the object of knowledge that we seek in the pursuit of philosophy. The real is that which is eternal and unchanging. And we shouldn't be surprised to find that St. Thomas Aquinas teaches the same thing in the Summa Theologica, because this is Catholic teaching. This is Catholic philosophy. Catholic philosophy simply continues this ancient pursuit of wisdom, the development of these ancient thoughts. St. Thomas Aquinas teaches the same in the Summa Theologica. He distinguishes between mutable or changeable. The word mutable means changeable, from the Latin mutare, to change. St. Thomas distinguishes between mutable, material creatures and immaterial, immutable substances. An example of a mutable material creature would be the human body, or an animal, a plant, anything material. All of these things are mutable and changing. If we think about our mortality, we're talking about our mutability. The fact that what is living today is going to die in the future. We're mortal, we're mutable, material creatures. But that which is immaterial and immutable, such as the human soul or the angels, that is more real to the philosopher. So if I say, what are you? And you say, well, I'm a human being. I'm a creature composed of body and soul. You can see how even the Baltimore Catechism, if you've studied the Baltimore Catechism, goes on to go deeper and say, well, if we're composed of body and soul, which of these is more valuable? Which of these is more real? And the answer in the Catechism is the soul is more valuable. Why? Because it lasts forever. because it's immutable, it's immaterial. The human soul is more valuable, it's more real. And you can see how, in order to become wise, we've got to make this change in the way we think about things. That which is real is not that which is sensible or tangible. That which is real is that which is immutable, that which is immaterial, like the human soul or like the angels, like God himself. These are more real because they are less subject to change. They're less subject to change, and that makes them real. The knowledge of these things is more desirable because this is a knowledge of things that do not change. Once we obtain this knowledge, it's valuable forever. And that's always what we desire in anything we pursue. We don't merely pursue things to experience them or taste them or have them for a moment, but when there's something that's lovable, something that's beloved, we seek it and we seek to possess it and to enjoy it forever. We even talk about God like that. We say, God made us to know him, to love him, and to serve him, and to enjoy him, not for a moment, not for a few years, not for 1,000 years, but to enjoy him forever. And if the reward of eternal life was anything other than eternal life, it would be unsatisfying to the human soul, which was created for an eternal enjoyment. So our souls long for things which are permanent, things which never change. We desire to pursue things which we can obtain and hold on to forever. We value that which does not lose its value. These are the things that are most real, things that are less subject to change. And above all of these things, as I said, God is pure being itself. God is that which never changes, the ultimate, immutable, unchangeable reality. In Latin, the phrase ipsum esse subsistens, ipsum esse subsistens, communicates the idea of that which is pure being itself, that which is being itself or subsistence itself, never changing. God is that which never changes. The ultimate reality is God. And all other things are said to be real only inasmuch as they participate in his eternal being. All other things are said to exist or to be by participation in his being. Remember when St. John talks about our Lord in the opening chapters of the Gospel, he says, "In him was life. In him was life." He was that which exists. He is the I am, the existing one, the subsisting one, the one that never changes. He is the ultimate reality, and the knowledge of God is therefore the ultimate desire of the human soul, the ultimate philosophy, the ultimate wisdom, as it were. So for Nicomachus, teaching about the art of arithmetic in the first century, just as for St. Thomas, teaching theology in the 13th century, the idea of wisdom is the same. Wisdom seeks what is unchangeable. Wisdom seeks what is unchangeable. And this means that philosophy, it's not just a mental exercise or a subject, a department in the university. You see how poorly philosophy is thought of in modern society. Philosophy is not just a mental exercise or a department. Philosophy is a path. Philosophy is a life. It's a pursuit of the contemplation of eternal truth. Philosophy is the path by which we contemplate eternal truth, by the path by which we seek the knowledge of things which never change and which will never change. And I hope that as I talk about this, you can just feel the peace, the tranquility that brings to the human soul. Like, St. Augustine said, our souls are always restless until they rest in God. And we can see what he's talking about. Our souls were created for eternity, and they're restless. They don't feel comfortable. Our souls feel like something is lacking, like they're not where they belong, until they finally are brought to rest in that which is and never changes. So for Nicomachus, just as for St. Thomas Aquinas, wisdom seeks that which is unchangeable. Philosophy is the path toward the contemplation of eternal truths. The philosophical life is a life of contemplation. Again, the contemplative life is not a Christian invention. The contemplative life in Christian tradition is a continuation of the contemplative life that was known to and established by the ancient philosophers, a path toward the contemplation of eternal truths. In the words of St. Augustine, to take an idea from St. Augustine, who's wonderful in communicating these philosophical truths, faith seeks understanding, or we seek understanding through faith. These two concepts of religion and philosophy, faith and understanding, they're inseparable. Philosophy, when rightly understood, is an exercise, is a life of faith seeking understanding. We believe that we may understand. We study that we may believe, and we believe that we may understand. And it's this constant cycle by which we pursue the knowledge of that which is eternal, true, and divine, that which never changes. That's true philosophy. And again, that was a concept that was developed before Christianity by ancient wise men, by the human soul recognizing these things. Now, modern man is tempted to trust only what can be seen, and he's been taught to think like this, especially by the modern scientific method. Modern man is tempted to trust only what can be seen, touched, or measured, that which can be observed, that which can be known through experimentation or observation. That's the modern idea promoted by the scientific method, which has spread to sort of take over every different field of study, which is an obvious error, an error that plagues and is destroying modern society. But Nicomachus teaches otherwise. Nicomachus, though he's not a Christian, doesn't accept this modern anti-Christian idea about knowledge and truth. He teaches the opposite. He teaches that bodies and material objects are not truly real. Nicomachus teaches that bodies, material bodies or objects, are not truly real, precisely because they're always changing. They're not real. What we perceive through our senses is always shifting, always changing. What was here today is gone tomorrow. What we saw yesterday appears differently today. What we saw yesterday might not even exist today. Yet we still speak of things as if they were permanent. We speak of sensible things, material things, as if they're permanent, because we're just not thoughtful. We're not careful to think about the things we say. And this insight reflects the thinking of Plato. Plato, who was a follower, indirectly a follower of Pythagoras in many ways, who is referred to as the teacher of Aristotle, which is really not very helpful because he didn't teach Aristotle Aristotle's ideas. He was the teacher under whom Aristotle studied and from whom Aristotle separated himself later. But Plato spoke about a world of appearances. And anytime you see the word appearance in philosophy, it's a bad thing. The way things appear, not as they really are. So the idea of appearances is sort of this idea of deceptive appearances, deceiving perceptions. Plato spoke about a world of appearances and compared that or contrasted that world with the world of forms. And I'm not going to get into Platonic philosophy here, but he made this distinction between the world of appearances, the way things appear to the senses, which is unreliable and untrue, really, versus the world of forms, which is real and unchanging. And again, this is not necessarily true philosophy, as we'll see as we go on in our philosophy studies, but this was a distinction made by Plato, which allowed for great progress in philosophy, making this distinction between the visible material world of appearances versus the world of forms, the world of appearances that are known by what's called common sense, that is the use of the senses, as opposed to the world of forms, which is understood only by means of contemplation, philosophical study and contemplation. But going more deeply, Plato's teaching, if we think about it, does echo the content of sacred scripture. St. Paul, for example, said, "What is seen is transitory." Notice the negative connotation. St. Paul says, what is seen, that which is perceived by the senses, is transitory. It's not important. It's not lasting. It's transitory. That which is seen. And what is seen? What's seen is that which is material. The physical, the bodily, the material. That which is seen, St. Paul says, that's transitory. But what is unseen, he says, is eternal. What is seen is transitory. What is unseen is eternal. So we can see these Pythagorean or Platonic ideas present in the teaching of the apostles, of St. Paul himself, inspired by the Holy Spirit. It's in 2 Corinthians. He says that. What is seen is transitory. What is unseen is eternal. Reality, in its fullness, is not bound to time or space. It's not transitory. It's not temporary. Reality is not bound to time or space. It's not material. It's spiritual. Reality is spiritual. That which is spiritual is real. That which doesn't change, that which always is, that's real. That which is bound to time or space, that which is material, that which is changing, is not real. So Nicomachus makes an important distinction between two different kinds of things: bodily things, material things, things perceived by the senses, things which change constantly. And you need to take time and reflect on this and just think, what are these things? What are these bodily things? And how do they change constantly? And how can I learn to see beyond these things, to see beyond these bodily things, these material things, things which are transitory, things which change constantly. How can I learn to live and think beyond these things, to think of this second class of things which Nicomachus talks about, which are immaterial things? And it's important to note here, immaterial concepts. Not just, so we have to be a little more subtle here. We're not just talking about God. We're not just talking about the soul. We're not just talking about angels or spirits when we say spiritual things, immaterial things. It's a little more complicated than that. When we talk about immaterial things in philosophy, we're also talking about immaterial concepts, ideas which exist in the soul, which do not change. And examples that Nicomachus gives us, and you can see how this begins to lead us into the study of classical arithmetic or philosophical arithmetic. Some examples of immaterial or unchanging concepts would be things like quantity, relation, equality, time, place. You can see how the knowledge of these things, the understanding of quantity, the understanding of the essence of quantity or time or equality or place, these things once known, their essence never changes. And so you can see that when we talk about immaterial things, that which is unseen, that which is unchanging, we're not just, don't oversimplify it. We're not just talking about God and angels and the soul. We're also talking about things that exist in the intellect, things that we can understand as human beings, which is profound if you think about it. God has given us in our soul, by the faculty of reason, he's given us this ability to know that which belongs to wisdom. He's given us this ability to know immaterial things, knowledge that other animals don't possess. We have this ability to know not only that which is bodily and sensible, but also that which is immaterial, that which is invisible, which has no weight, no smell, no taste, no feeling. Immaterial concepts such as quantity, relation, equality, time, and place. And we'll see that these become the real subjects of philosophy. And now we can see why they become the subjects of philosophy. It's not just because philosophers are these strange, weirdos that talk about these odd subjects. It's that these are the only subjects worth knowing. They're the only things that do not change. And therefore, they're the things that are worth contemplating. So Nicomachus makes this distinction between bodily things and immaterial things, which include ideas, concepts that exist in the human soul. The idea, again, of equality never changes. Once we learn what equality is, that knowledge lasts forever, because equality, the essence of what it means for things to be equal, that idea will never change. It is always the same, even if we try to compare. For example, two sticks or two weights, they can continue to be equal. The idea of equality is the same, even if the objects are different. We can see how this knowledge of what is equal transcends these different things. And so Nicomachus teaches that immaterial realities are more stable and thus more real than the material objects we perceive, and you can see how that's the opposite of what modern society thinks. Philosophy teaches us that immaterial realities are more stable and therefore more real than material objects that we perceive. Now, among these bodiless realities, Nicomachus includes concepts like shape, size, time, motion, and order. You can see these are, again, the subjects of contemplation. These are not bodies themselves. The bodies can change, but these things don't change. These are not bodies, but the principles, these are the principles that help us to understand or think about bodies. These things are accidental to bodies. They're not substantial. They belong to bodies in a certain way. They belong to bodies in experience, in that they participate. They're found in bodies. But they do not belong to the essence of bodies. And so they can be abstracted from material things and contemplated in and of themselves as immaterial things that never change. Nicomachus says that these things are of themselves immovable and unchangeable. And again, he's talking about these accidental characteristics of bodily things. Things like size and shape, time, motion. And you can see how these are going to become the subjects we study in philosophy, in arithmetic, in geometry, in music, in astronomy, in metaphysics, and so on. These are the things that don't change. These are the things, the knowledge of which is most valuable. These things are of themselves immovable and unchangeable. And this idea of the knowledge of that which is immovable and unchangeable, which is a very ancient idea that predates Christianity, it helps us as Catholics to understand how the human mind was created for truth. The human mind was created for this knowledge, this truth, this wisdom. And again, the Catechism explains this. The Catechism says the desire for God is written in the human heart. And that's obviously a kind of poetic language to say it's programmed into the human soul. The human soul is created for God. It's created with a desire for God. Again, to go back to St. Augustine, it's restless until it rests in God. A good comparison here, and I know I'm getting long on time. When we think about the four elements in ancient philosophy, fire, air, water, and earth, each of these elements, we learn, has a natural place. And when we mix the elements together, they seek to return to their natural place. The earth seeks to move below the fire, the air, and the water. The air seeks to rise above the water. The fire seeks to rise above the air. These four elements seek to return. They always seek to return to the place that is assigned to their nature. And the nature of man, the nature of the human soul, is to seek God himself. The nature of man is to seek God himself. The desire for God is written in the human heart because man is created by God, but more importantly, man is created for God. The desire for God is written in the human heart because man is created by God and for God. Man is seeking, the human soul is seeking to return to God in the same way that fire is seeking to return to the heavens, or water is seeking to return beneath the air. The human soul is seeking to return to God. We long for what is eternal because our souls were made by the Eternal One and for the Eternal One, but also for eternity. Our souls, our natural place, as it were, for our souls is eternity. Nicomachus's view calls us, even as Christians, to our shame. Nicomachus's view calls us to lift our minds above the ever-changing appearances of the world to the eternal truths that order all things, that structure reality. So mathematics, in his view, in the view of Nicomachus, mathematics isn't a tool for measurement. It's not just something that's practically useful. Mathematics, and this gets really beautiful, I think, mathematics is the language of this divine order. Mathematics is the language of divine order. It's the language of this pursuit of wisdom. It's a bridge between the human mind and the Logos, the Word, through whom all things were made, as St. John says. Mathematics is a bridge, and as we study philosophy, we'll see just how true that really is. Mathematics, when understood in the context of philosophy, mathematics is a bridge between the human mind and the Logos, the Word, through whom all things were made. Wisdom, true wisdom, is concerned with what is never changing. Nicomachus says it is primarily concerned with bodiless things. It's primarily concerned with bodiless things. And then secondarily, it's concerned with bodies. It's concerned with material things in a secondary way. So that which is useful, knowledge of material things around us, knowledge of that which is transitory. Again, this becomes really the heart of Aristotelian philosophy. The material things are important. They are valuable. We don't have this dualistic view of the world where we reject material things as evil. They're good, but that good is relative. And that which is spiritual, that which is immaterial, is much greater, just as the soul is greater than the body. But we're not saying the body is evil. It's simply not as valuable, not as good as the soul. So we are concerned in philosophy with bodies in a secondary way. We're concerned primarily with bodiless things. And then secondarily, we take that knowledge of bodiless things and use it to understand bodies, material things. This means that true knowledge doesn't begin with scientific experiments. It doesn't begin with a scientific method. True knowledge begins with a search for what does not pass away. True knowledge begins with a search for that which does not pass away. So you can see the difference here between the views of truth and the pursuit of truth, how different this ancient philosophical, religious view of wisdom is from the modern school view, which is studying in a science lab or making decisions based on your own experience and so on. True wisdom begins with a study of that which does not pass away, and having learned that truth and having the mind fixed on those eternal realities, it then turns, in light of those realities, it turns to material things and understands all material things through those things which are immaterial and unchanging. And this is why the church has always prioritized the contemplative life. This is why the modern church has a real problem with vocations. The church, through history, always prioritized the contemplative life because it's a pursuit of things that are of greater value. In the thinking of St. Thomas, the highest activity of man is contemplation, to see the truth and rest in it. Contemplation is the ultimate fulfillment of human nature. It's not idleness. We shouldn't think that working with our hands and building things and doing things material is real work, and contemplation is this sort of idle religious nonsense. It's actually the other way around. Contemplation is the highest activity of man. People will say things like, oh, getting married and having children, that's the highest. No, that's a Protestant idea. That's a false idea, an idea that even ancient philosophers would reject. The highest activity of man is contemplation, to seek the knowledge of the truth and to rest in that knowledge. It's not idleness. It's not inactivity. It's real human work. It's the proper end, the true end of a rational soul. Aristotle explains this in his Ethics. When he talks about the different kinds of lives, he says the life of contemplation. The life of contemplation is the most self-sufficient. It's the most continuous. It's the most pleasant for human beings. The contemplative life is the most satisfying human life because human beings are created body and soul, the greater part of which is the soul, and they were created for contemplation. Contemplation is the proper end of a rational life. The life of contemplation is most self-sufficient, most continuous, most pleasant, most tranquil, most satisfying. And Nicomachus would agree with Aristotle, because for Nicomachus, arithmetic, again, is not about practical utility. It's not a study that allows us to count money or to count our change or to measure fences on the farm or to weigh products for sale. That's not the purpose. Remember, bodily things are studied only after bodiless things have been understood. They're studied in light of the knowledge of unchanging things. So for Nicomachus, arithmetic is not just a study that helps us to do stuff. The study of arithmetic is a necessary part of philosophy. It's a necessary part of human life to Nicomachus. It's about ordering the soul, bringing order to the soul, to understand what is eternal. To use these ancient ideas, what is eternal, what is harmonious, what is divine. That's the purpose of the study of arithmetic, to bring order to the soul, to bring the soul, as it were, to its resting place. The study of number in classical arithmetic doesn't lead the student into practical things, but it leads the soul upward, away from the chaos of constantly changing material things into the clarity of a world of unchanging things. And this is why among the ancients, because of this separation, this sanctification of the soul, of the mind, as it were, wisdom was considered sacred and was inseparable from religion. Now Pythagoras, getting back to Pythagoras, whom Nicomachus praises, wasn't merely a mathematician, even though he's known today for his mathematical theorem, right, the Pythagorean theorem. He was not a modern mathematician. He was primarily a moral philosopher, as strange as this may seem. He was a moral philosopher. He was a religious reformer in the ancient world. He was a moral philosopher, a religious teacher, a religious figure, almost like a priest in the ancient world. I'm talking about Pythagoras. Yet he was a mathematician. But again, we've got to understand mathematician in this ancient sense. He was a mathematician, which meant he was a moral philosopher and a religious reformer. He was a moral philosopher and a religious reformer, which meant that he was a mathematician. These things were not separated as they are today because of our screwed up modern worldview. Pythagoras believed that the structure of the world, the structure of the cosmos in Greek, the structure of the world, remember the world is always thought of as that which God had made, that which God had created, God's handiwork. We can't see God, but we can see the things that he made. And mathematics was the study of number, the study of quantity, and this number or quantity was the means by which we could come to know the structure of the cosmos, the structure of the world. We can know the mind of the Creator. It could be understood through mathematics. And Pythagoras taught that when we learn to understand this number, this mathematics of the universe, we'll learn principles of number and quantity that have sort of analogous applications to our moral life. And a system of moral philosophy will be drawn from this art of arithmetic, mathematics. So we will live in harmony. We will live in harmony with this structure that exists in the natural world, and this harmony Pythagoras called virtue. So he was a moral philosopher, a religious reformer, and a mathematician in the ancient sense. Though he wasn't Christian, he wasn't a Christian, even though many of these ideas are shared by Christianity or continued and embraced by Christianity. He wasn't a Christian, Pythagoras, but he believed that number, the study of number, reveals divine order, reveals the mind of God, as it were, the design of the universe, actually puts us in contact with the Creator. And this idea that he had is not, as I said, it's not foreign to Catholic thought. St. Augustine wrote a work on the art of music, believe it or not. He wrote a work titled De Musica. And he wrote that numbers are the thoughts of God. And so you can see how profound this view of mathematics becomes. When you think truly of numbers, you are now sharing in the thoughts of God. You are now thinking in harmony with the divine mind. St. Augustine taught that. Numbers are the thoughts of God. St. Thomas Aquinas stated that creation is governed by measure, number, and weight. Creation is governed by number or measure and weight. So the knowledge of mathematics is a knowledge of the divine plan by which the universe was made. And this knowledge, the knowledge of the things that are made, the understanding of the divine mind, that's wisdom. That's wisdom. And so Nicomachus's opening claim when he starts the Arithmetic, that the pursuit of wisdom belongs to those men, which was, again, Pythagoras' idea, that this idea of wisdom belongs to those men who seek unchanging realities. This philosophical idea of mathematics points us to Catholic truth. God, who is unchanging, reveals himself to us through this order in the natural world. Not just through religion, not just through Bible study, but he reveals himself to us through the order in the natural world. And we, as human beings, made in his image, given these rational souls, were actually made to seek him and find him through reason and contemplation. That's what we're created for. We're created for contemplation. God reveals himself through the things which he's made by means of the order in them, which our souls have the ability to discern. And this knowledge, which is obtained by means of reason and contemplation, this is true wisdom. So when Nicomachus says that philosophy is the love of wisdom, he doesn't mean it's some sort of leisure hobby. You know, I read philosophy to fill my spare time. I find it interesting. I like it. Like some people garden, some people crochet. You know, I read philosophy. That's not what the ancient philosophers meant by philosophy. The love of wisdom was not just a hobby or an academic discipline as in modern schooling. Nicomachus means that philosophy is the proper calling of the human mind. To love wisdom is to pursue God, to pursue truth. That's what man is made for. It's what it means to be truly human, to be perfect, to actually fulfill our end. To love wisdom is the proper calling of the human mind. It's to pursue God, to pursue the truth, to live in harmony with reality. Reality that exists in or underlies all things that exist. So in the modern world, where it's just so difficult because we live in a world dominated by foolishness, by constantly changing trends, fleeting opinions, all kinds of material distractions. We live in a society that's almost as far to the opposite of this world of the wise man that could possibly be imagined. Nicomachus, here in this work on arithmetic, is calling us back to something deeper. He's calling us to remember what we are as human beings. He's calling us back to be what we are. We're not made to produce, merely to produce. We're not made just to be consumers. We're not made just to survive. We're not animals. It's not enough for us to grow some food or to have a house or to have a car or do any sort of worldly business. We weren't made for that. We're made for more. We're made to know, love, and contemplate what is eternal, even God himself. That's what we're made for. Contemplation is the proper calling of the human mind, the human soul. And so in this way, Nicomachus's introduction to arithmetic does much more than just open a mathematics book. It opens the door to philosophical theology, as it were, a true vision of what it is that we're seeking when we talk about philosophy in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Nicomachus introduces us or calls us back to this proper pursuit, this contemplative life. He reminds us that truth isn't invented by men. It's not something for us to invent, but to discover, because it already exists. Nicomachus encourages Catholics to approach even mathematics as a sacred discipline, a discipline that prepares our soul for worship and aligns our mind with the God who created the world, the God who orders all things and brings us to this place of rest and happiness that can last forever and for which we were made. So that's the purpose that Nicomachus sets out to fulfill in this opening chapter on arithmetic. I think it's clear how beautifully this aligns with the Catholic life, and I think that you, like me, can see how far we are from this worldview in modern society and how refreshing it is to think of returning to this life which is our proper calling, this contemplative life. So as we get started with mathematics, I think we've established the context of this study, and we've sort of gotten a foretaste of what it offers us, and we haven't even begun the study yet. So as we get into this and study the art of classical arithmetic, we're going to have a really enjoyable time as we study here, preparing our souls for worship. Our worship is going to improve because, like I said before, all true knowledge begins with wonder, just desiring to know, because that's what our soul is created for. Our soul desires to know. But the end of that pursuit is worship. And so this isn't something separate, something other than our Christian life, our spiritual life. This is actually a part of a true spiritual life that's going to enable us to worship God more perfectly, to worship Him with all of the faculties that He gave to us in creating us for that purpose, to know Him, to love Him, to serve Him, and to enjoy Him, to rest in Him forever. I hope that's helpful. God bless.